Hello everybody, you're watching the Beanbird 2 channel where we talk about testimonies and the goodness of God. And today I have a special testimony that I came across when I was doing the reading time with my youngest daughter. She had some reading through her school book and I thought the story was just so good and it was a wonderful testimony, and I thought this must be a true story. So I ended up looking it up and found out that it really was a true story, and it's a testimony of the way that God works in the life of a believer. And I think this is the kind of encouragement that everybody really needs to hear, to know how God works in our lives and the way that He provides for us when we have faith. And this is also a way to build faith when we trust in the Lord and hear stories like this. And so I want to share with you today. This story is about a man named George Muller, and his ministry was more around the late 1800s. And so just before I get into the story, I want to share just a little bit of a backstory. He was a Christian at the age of 20, and he studied at Hale. And first his life plan was that he wanted to be a missionary, but various life circumstances kept him from carrying out that plan. And isn't that the way? Sometimes we have a goal and we're like, we want to do that. And sometimes things come in the way from us realizing those goals. But God still worked in his life and had an amazing plan that in a way that he moved in his life. And so he went to Bristol, England to help with some pastoral work there. And they left their native land of Prussia, and for 8 years they ministered to a growing congregation. And during that time they lived by faith and by the promises of God alone. And while he was serving in the Bristol pastorate, there came into his hand the biography of August H. Frank, through whom God for 30 years had supplied the needs of over 2,000 orphans. So this testimony of this man that he read about, August Frank, he was very inspired by his the work that he had done ministering to these orphans, and he ended up serving orphans in his own town. So let me get into the story. Okay, so this story doesn't have an author listed. It's from a book, Growing Up Around the World. It's from a Becca book, but there's no author listed. So it's called Manna from Heaven, and just kind of listen to this story and let it bless you. Okay. A tiny bell rang from downstairs, waking Toby from his dream. Waking Toby from his dream. Okay, let's start over. That's the first sentence and I already ruined it. Okay, let's start over. A tiny bell rang from downstairs, waking Toby from his dream. Toby quickly hopped up and made his bed. When he had brushed his hair and buttoned his shirt, he followed the other children down the stairs to the dining room. He turned the corner and walked into the room to find his place at the long table. But something was different about the table today. The places were set with bowls and cups, but they were empty. Toby's eyes were so fixed on the empty bowls that he bumped right into Mr. Muller. "Oh," gasped Toby. "I'm sorry, sir." "That's quite all right, Toby," said Mr. Muller. Toby looked at Mr. Muller's face and then back to the table. He wondered if he should ask about the food, but he was worried about what the answer might be. At last Toby asked, "Why are the bowls empty this morning?" "Well, Toby," said Mr. Muller, "there is no more food in the kitchen. We've eaten every last crumb." Toby's eyes were wide. What would Mr. Muller do? Then he thought of something. "Mr. Muller," he said, "if there's no food left, why did you ring the bell for breakfast?" "Because I believe that God will give us what we need," said Mr. Muller. Without another word, he walked to the head of the table and bowed his head to pray. The children saw him and bowed their heads as well. Mr. Muller prayed, "Dear God, we thank you for this food that you will give us." Toby listened as Mr. Muller prayed. Could it be true? Would God make the food just appear? Toby wanted to believe like Mr. Muller, but there was still no food on the table. While Mr. Muller was praying, there was a knock on the door. He stopped and went to open the door. Toby poked his head out the window to see who was outside. It was the baker standing there with baskets of bread. "I was up all night wondering if your children had food for breakfast," the baker said to Mr. Muller. "I couldn't sleep, so I baked loaves of bread for all of you." "Oh, thank you, sir," said Mr. Muller. "Please come in. You're just in time." The baker brought the baskets inside and passed out the bread to all the children, who were very grateful. Toby stared at the piece of bread in his hand. He almost expected it to be glowing as if it were manna straight from heaven. Just then, there was another knock on the door. Mr. Muller opened it to find the milkman. His cart of milk had broken down just outside the orphanage. "Hello, sir," said the milkman. "I'm sorry to bother you. I need to fix my cart, and it may take many hours. All this milk is going to spoil if I don't give it to someone. Please, take it for me." "We would be glad to," said Mr. Muller. "Thank you." "Children, come, carry in the milk." And the children giggled to themselves and ran out the door to carry the milk to the kitchen table. Toby filled each cup on the table with milk. When he was done, he looked at the table that had just been empty. Now God had filled it with fresh bread and milk. Once they were at the table again, the children ate their bread and drank their milk happily. They had seen God work in a miracle right before their eyes, and they would never forget it. And then this Bible verse, Matthew 21:22. "In all things, whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer, believing ye shall receive." I love how Mr. Muller thanked God for food that wasn't yet there. That shows an amazing amount of faith, and I think that also encourages me to pray that way, to pray with expectation, to pray with faith, and to pray believing. Because we know that the Lord promises to supply our needs and that He will be there for us in times of trouble. And when I first read this story, I was like, this story has got to be true, because this is exactly the way that God works. And then when I looked it up on the internet, I found out that it was a true story. In fact, there's a lot more to this man's testimony that I want to share more on Monday. Some of the details, things that happened in his life. It's very inspiring the way that he relied on the Lord and he prayed with a believing heart, with expectation and anticipation, and the way that God moved under so much faith. And I think that especially now when times are lean, people may be out of work or looking for housing. I've been hearing so many requests for people searching for housing and jobs, and we need to believe that we have a miracle working God, and that God still does miracles today, and He orchestrates all things for the good of those who love Him. And so I hope that this story blesses you today, and I hope you have a wonderful Saturday. Thanks.